What's up, everyone? I'm Anthony Gallegos from IGN, here along with Richard, the Senior Director of Marketing at Telltale Games, here to talk about Walking Dead Episode 2. So, Richard, what is the basic premise for Walking Dead Episode 2, where we left off from 1 and what kind of where we're jump-starting into 2?
Well, The Walking Dead's an episodic game. We've got it's a five-part series, and now we're moving into Part 2. So, Part 2 is obviously a continuation of what we saw last time, but obviously further to that, it depends on what you did in Episode 1, what you're actually going to see in Episode 2. So there were some major choices, major decisions that you had to make in Episode 1. One of those, for example, was, spoiler alert, whether you should save Doug or whether you should save Carly. So one of those people is going to be with you, and one of those people, the person that is with you, is going to maybe contribute to your survival in a way that the other person might not have. So obviously that's a big deal. One of the great things about this game is, as well as those huge, obvious decisions that you're making, the game is tracking absolutely everything that you do and say. So all of those things are available to our writers, and things that you might have thought were relatively innocuous in Episode 1 might come back to bite you in the ass in Episode 2.
So is it totally plausible that your writers, since all these stats are being tracked, can look and be like, oh my god, everyone's saving this character, we should do something important with that character in Episode 5, we should try and think of something really cool to do with that, since everyone seems to be using that character?
We don't. Obviously, if there's a lower percentage of people that use it, a lower percentage of people have saved Doug than have saved Carly, right? But obviously, we are still writing a fully featured, amazing story for Doug. In fact, Doug is a real person in real life. He's based on our old IT guy from Telltale Games, and so we want you to save Doug. Save Doug.
Right, what you were saying, sorry, just to clarify, you were saying that most people have killed Doug, have let
Doug
die.
I'm sorry, yeah, so most people have killed Doug. So Carly is by far the more popular choice for people. I'm not sure whether that's to do with her being an attractive lady with a gun, but
maybe a lot of people with White Knight, they want to save the lady.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe they think. So I've also heard that the Walking Dead Episode 2, at least Greg Miller, who wrote up the preview for IGN, he came away with this idea that he was like, the first episode definitely didn't shy away from violence. Right. Definitely the most violent thing Telltale's done, and I mean that in the best way. Right. But he said that he was kind of surprised at some of the really visceral violence that he saw in Episode 2.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a goal of the dev team to make people understand that they've not lost that sensitivity to violence. People can go out and they can play an M-rated first-person shooter, and obviously there's tons and tons of violence in there, but you almost most people, in fact, want that violence to happen. It's a spectacular thing to see on screen. With The Walking Dead, what we're very much aiming for is for you to discover that you still have those levels of squeamishness that you thought you didn't have anymore. You don't want to see that violence. You don't want to perform that violent act, but you're forced into it just because the world of The Walking Dead is just such a dark and horrible place. So,
The Walking Dead's obviously it has some of the most passionate fans out there right now, especially in comic books. How has it been for Telltale? You're no strangers to license games, but this is probably one of the biggest pop culture icons right now out there. Working on that, I imagine, has to be daunting.
I think it is when you're successful. We've been just thrilled and gratified with how much people have liked Episode 1, so no doubt there's more pressure now on Telltale and the dev team to create the rest of the season. But I think on the flip side of that, everybody who's making the game is a huge fan of The Walking Dead. We are working directly with Robert Kirkman and the folks at Skybound, so we've obviously got very, very good guidance there, and we're just trying to make as authentic a Walking Dead experience as possible, and hopefully people are going to see that.
For people that this is their first exposure to The Walking Dead, so just to clarify for them, the TV show, obviously, it involves some of the same characters, at least in name, and it involves some of the same themes, but it diverts pretty directly from the comic books. The Walking Dead game series, though, that is directly tying into the comic book series, right?
Yeah, we see the comic book series as canonical. So, if you think of the crummy way of saying it is, if you think of the comic book as the sun, and there are different planets orbiting around it, the TV show is one planet and we're another planet. But we take our universe directly from the core story that Robert's created in the comic books. So it's cool that they're going off in another direction. The TV show offers another view of Kirkman's world, if you like, but we see the stuff that happened in the comic book as that is the law.
Even if Robert Kirkman's comic is the sun, though, as you say, it's obviously there's an intersect there.
Right.
We see characters that come in from the actual comics, we saw Herschel in the first episode. Is there any hints or anything like that about characters that we might see from the comics also coming into Episode 2, other than maybe some returning characters?
I think, we wanted to make sure that any crossover that did happen between, the game and the comic book was as much of an organic thing as possible. So you're not like, that wouldn't happen.
Forcing someone in.
Yeah, like, oh, look, there's Glenn, We wanted to make sure that it felt very, very natural. So trying to force something in again, I think, would kind of be pushing it over the edge. The main thing for us is that we're focusing on the authenticity of the world. So in this episode, in episode 2, there's a huge revelation revealed that fans of both the comic book and the TV show will know by now. But if you think of the sort of parallel story of Rick Grimes, those folks don't understand that this thing is a thing in the world, and we reveal it earlier on in the game, and that's just an example of bringing these huge beats from Kirkman's world into the game.
I mean, so obviously you're having to create new characters, you're having to do all these things. I guess what type of other sources do you go to for inspiration? The comics, do a lot of that, but when you guys are researching potential storylines, potential situations, are you guys like doing research watching zombie movies, or is there like just a room where you guys talk about potential survival situations?
Yeah.
I imagine everyone has to have zombies on the brain. All the
I
time.
mean, obviously. So the thing about Telltale is every game that we work on, if it's a licensed IP, then we first and foremost have to be huge fans of it, and that's where a lot of that stuff comes from. But I think the main thing with how the dev team and how the story writers have gone about creating the game is just as one example, Gary Widder, who's working on our game, he always tells a story about when they sit down at a table and talk about ideas for what's going to be in that episode. If somebody comes up with something and says, "Oh, you can't do that, that's awful," that's the way they're going to go, because that kind of is it's like the Bible coming from Kirkman, because he said to us, "I love to torture people." He loves torturing people in the game, and in his world. So obviously, awful stuff happens to Rick Grimes and other people, like Rick, spoiler, loses his hand and all that kind of stuff. But in the game itself, it's even better for us in a way, because we can actually then pull people into that world as Lee and physically torture them within a new medium.
I imagine the torture situations that you kind of run to are where the Walking Dead gameplay, it's obviously like it's an adventure game, but like many adventure games, I think even more so for The Walking Dead, this one's all about like the choices that you're making. And so I think that those torture situations must result in some of the best opportunities to make people make like an agonizing decision.
Yeah, there are no good decisions that you can make in the world of The Walking Dead. I mean, this is a truly, by its very nature, it's a horrific place, not just in terms of the genre, but just the experience that you're having. So the things that you'll see and do, there's never going to be a good outcome, like, oh, hey, everything's okay, we found lots of food, we're going to go on to have many happy adventures. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to just deal with whatever situation you're facing in the best possible manner, simply to survive. For if you're playing Lee, obviously you want to survive, and you're also looking after Clementine, and you want to make sure that she survives. And the things that you do, everybody else in the game world is seeing, all the other characters are seeing, and they're going to respond to the things that you do and say. Especially Clementine, she's watching everything that you do. So depending on all your decisions as they mount up through the entire season, that's obviously going to have a really, really strong effect on this little girl by the time you get to episode 5.
Yeah, I think in the trailers and stuff, sometimes everyone sees Lee and they think of Lee as the main character, and yes, Lee's like the character that you directly play as, but it often feels like Clementine is much like almost the most important character in the
I mean, there are almost two stories going on in the game. There's kind of Clementine's story about how how the world is affecting her as a little girl, and actually one of the things that I really like in episode 2 is you start to see that she's developing away from that kind of scared little girl that you first met. I mean, the episode 2 begins 3 months after the events of episode 1, so she's starting to change. She's seen all these bad things, and she's starting to develop into kind of a different person. She's obviously being molded by the stuff she's seeing around her. So she's growing up a lot, and there's this really, really cool scene where something terrible has just happened, and she takes this grown guy by the hand and says, come over here and see what I'm doing, to try and distract him from the horror that he's just seen.
Yeah, I think that's like a good parallel between maybe that and the Kirkman comics, because Kirkman also uses children in a way where you kind of see the fact that it's almost like they're being robbed of their childhood innocence. It's like they're having to adjust to this world.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because you as a player can, again, through your actions and the things that you say, when Clementine is observing you, you can make a decision like, do I want to somehow attempt to shield her from what's going on right now, or do I just play things out as they are? Maybe it's a survival situation, and I have to do this knowing full well that Clementine's going to see it and it's going to affect her. So it's not just, there are so many levels to each decision that you make. Like some of them aren't maybe visible at first on the surface, but everything is going to play out and have an effect on your story.
So to go back to a little bit to the statistics that you guys have been gathering and that sort of thing, how are there examples of how that actually like comes into play with like game design of episodes? Like, is that something that gets considered beyond maybe story elements? Like, is there a way for you guys to track?
Yeah,
like, like maybe we should have made this decision a little bit different to make people, like freak out, or maybe we didn't do a good enough job with this character to make people really like them enough to have a hard time making.
Well,
this
we're
decision.
not. So the stats that you see aren't gonna change the major story arc. We know what's going to happen in episode, from 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we know what the major story beats are, and they're definitely going to happen. But what tracking of stats allows us to do is really drill down on dialogue, for example. So if people have had a certain relationship with, Larry, Lily's father, we can see how people are reacting to that, and we can then tweak and record dialogue for whatever episode we're working on at the very last minute, so that it really makes a lot of sense to people who've been playing the game, and so that's a really cool luxury for us to have.
So, I mean, a lot of the stuff that Telltale has done in the past has obviously been much more lighthearted,
right.
Joking. Has it been, hard to adjust the studio to doing something that's obviously like a much more kind of, graphic, very serious tone?
I don't think so. I mean, it's probably in some ways it's some kind of catharsis, right? You've been happy for so long, and now you can really turn things around and put the screws in, and create these horrific situations. But again, it always circles back to the fact that the guys who work on the game are above all fans of the game, of the comic book, of the TV show, and so they just want to make something that lives up to that.
Has there ever been, I mean, obviously you guys don't shy away from violence against zombies and against humans to a large degree. Has there ever been the points in the storyline or something where you felt like you guys crossed into territory where you're like, I just don't think we're quite ready for that?
In what sense?
I'm just saying, is there ever been, I guess, something maybe too violent or something like that where you're this has to go to the cutting room floor, guys,
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I think the only thing that could possibly change something along those lines is if we ran afoul somehow of ESRB ratings or what have you, but we're staying true to Kirkman's world, and as you know, if you read the comic books, if you watch the TV show, it's a terrible, terrible place. Horrible things happen to people, and we're just sticking right with that.
So, I mean, one of the things that I think some people maybe critiqued a little bit in the first episode was some of the puzzles and that sort of thing. Has that been a challenge to design puzzles that make sense that we're, in a world full of zombies? It seems like no one's going to sit here and be like, how do I combine these 3 obscure items?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've totally moved away from that for this game because, like you said, it doesn't make sense. So, we've made games like Tales of Monkey Island, which have that classic adventure game combining these really bizarre objects with each other so you can open the door or go do, X or Y or Z. That doesn't make sense in the world of The Walking Dead, and we're not really an inventory-driven game. There is an inventory, but it's not really one that you can interact with in the traditional way. It shows you when you've picked up an item or something, but this is more to do with solving a problem that you would find if you were actually in a zombie apocalypse. So, you're going to find these situations where you have to figure something out, go talk to somebody so that you get a piece of information, but it's never weird or funny solutions to solving that problem. I think it's better to call them problems than calling them, puzzles.
So, I mean, obviously the characters are carrying over. Is there plans to have, every character we see from episode 1 to 5, there's the potential to keep, certain ones we really care about alive from start to finish?
Right.
So that is the plan, you really want to have people get attached to these characters and have them carry with them throughout the whole story.
We want people to be attached, but I'm not saying they're going to be able to stick around until the end. So,
sometimes it might not be your choice.
Right, yeah. I mean, this is the world of The Walking Dead, and actually, there's a really, really good example in episode 2, one that I can't reveal because I really don't want to spoil it, but you're forced into a situation where you have to do something, and even though you might not like this person, you have to do it for the good of all, and it's just you don't want to do it. Even though you really dislike this person, you've basically got to take them down, and you just have to deal with that.
I guess people are just going to have to wait and see what happens.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us, Richard.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for watching.